Hi, everybody, and welcome to the Meeting Protocol Monthly Podcast, where we chat with the coolest people in the business and bring you useful and relevant information about what's happening in the world of meeting planning. I am Dora Figueredo, the head of events and education at Meeting Protocol, coming to you from always my living room here in New Jersey. Today's guest is Paul Tramonte, a 20-year events industry expert who started with Marriott and just a few years ago started his own event planning company. He has planned a wide variety of events, including corporate, association, financial, healthcare, advertising, digital marketing, and talent acquisition. You've truly done it all, Paul. And on top of that, he has a CMP designation, which is one of the reasons we are talking today. So thank you so much for being with us today. I am so thrilled to chat with you, and I'm sure you've seen it all from your many years of experience, and I'm looking forward to hearing some great stories from you today. So tell us where you're joining from and the quick background of what got you into event planning.
Well, thanks for inviting me, Dora. I'm really excited to be chatting with you. I'm talking from my living room in Queens. I'm in Jackson Heights. And first of all, just a little tidbit. It's pronounced Marriott, like chariot, versus Marriott, which I know a lot of people pronounce it that way. It's something that I've learned along the way. So just a little tidbit. Yeah, I've been in events for quite some time. And I think, it all stems from a bit of curiosity. I've always been a very curious person. And when I started in the industry, I was working with Marriott and I was working in restaurants and bars. And it stemmed in an operational base and I really enjoyed it. But whenever I was there on a weekend and I saw events going on, I was like, ooh, what's happening there? And how did that all come together? And how did that become to look so great? And I started asking questions of the event manager, like, how did that come about? And it just kind of started to evolve. And while I continued along the restaurant path for a number of years, it continued even further when I'd see people sitting in a hotel in a BEO meeting reviewing BEOs or plans for the weekend. I kind of just sit down and listen. Like, what are you doing? I'm just curious to know what's happening here. And then I'd show up at an event on the weekends, and so I started to get more involved. And then I went into catering sales, which in hotels you're on the selling side mostly, selling the events and weddings and so forth. And then again, I'd be there on a weekend for a wedding, and people would be like, Paul, you're a seller. You don't need to be here on a Sunday. I'm like, oh, but I really want to. I want to know what's happening and how did that come together? And look at that decor. And so I just started to ask more questions, and as that evolved into working and move myself into the event side of things.
That's awesome. I love that you were so curious and that's how you got into it. I truly, one of my favorite things about this podcast is learning how people get into events because, if you're like a doctor, very often it's like, yeah, my parents really wanted me to go to med school,
It's
you
true.
whatever. But here people come into events in the most interesting of ways. And so,
And it's not, yeah, and it's not an easy, I mean, at the end of the day, it's, people think it looks fun, and it is fun. I truly enjoy what I do, but it's hard work. It's a lot of work. It's working on weekends and after hours and along things when you see friends on vacation or on Sundays, you're at the working. So that comes from a place of passion and wanting to do it. So it's where people who are in events and are truly good at it are people who truly love what they do and want to be there. And even though it is hard work, they appreciate that and recognize it.
yeah, I have missed a lot of birthdays. I've missed multiple holidays, for
Oh
events.
yeah.
Yeah, you really do have to
Yeah,
love
a lot of the looks in the family, like, okay, great, another Thanksgiving gone by.
it. Right. Yeah. And especially since you worked at a hotel, in Marriott, like Chariot. And I'm gonna say that to myself every time I say it now.
Yeah,
You guys get New Year's parties and Christmas parties and like all of the range of the major holidays that most people would expect to be spending with families, and you are making magic happen for other people's families and friends.
exactly. That's exactly right. I like the way you put that. That's so true.
Thanks. So you moved up the ranks in Marriott over what seems to be a super successful career with them. So tell us a little bit about the range of events that you saw over your time there.
Thank you very much for that. And it's true. I think I did see, quite a lot. And I think when I started in event management, I started to work in different sectors. When you're an event manager, you may say, hey, if you're in a bigger hotel, you're only doing small meetings of a certain size, or this person's only doing weddings. But I really wanted to have my hand in all different pots. And I think it goes back to what I was saying earlier about being curious, where I'd say, to my bosses at the time, hey, can I try this different event? Can I shadow you on this corporate event? Because I haven't done this particular corporate event before, or weddings. And then I started to pick it up and start to do more and more. So I was one of those event managers who wanted to do a little bit of everything. I don't want to be just meetings or just weddings or just small business meetings or trade shows. I wanted to have my hand on all these different pots. And because I had that wide variety of knowledge, whenever I looked for that next leap or that next job, I was a little more marketable. And that's also kind of what led me to the CMP, saying, hey, I want to know more about business meetings and how's that involved. And so even as I became a leader and I had my own teams of people reporting to me, that was one of the biggest things that I always look at as part of their development, was to say, hey, you've only really done just weddings before. You need to be looking at the other business side or the other types of events before, or galas, or if you're like, I've worked in DC, it's a lot of political events. So how do you touch those? Or people vice versa. So I always made sure that the team, knowing that it helped me kind of climb and grow in my own career, I make sure that my own team had that capability to do that. So even when there was a little bit of kind of, they'd begrudgingly take on, I remember I had an event manager who really took a long time to get her degree to start doing weddings. And within a year, it was like, oh, my bride did this, and oh, my bride did that. I was like, oh, great, now she's your bride. I see it totally evolved from not wanting to touch a wedding to being really engrossed. So I think, and over time, people get to say, you know what, did weddings, great, not my bag. I'm a corporate guy, or vice versa. So it lets people to kind of really explore, to know what really is the things that they love, and things could surprise them. You'd be very surprised on what you like and what you don't.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I think that so many folks who are not in the events industry, they see us as like, oh, you just like plan a party or whatever. Like, it's
Exactly.
way more than that, and you can specialize.
Way more than that.
Yeah, you
Yeah,
can specialize in
you
different.
really do touch all different things. I think that was one of the interesting things that I see coming out of the pandemic, is where people have landed and how they really kind of step back and say, what are my skills? What are the things that I'm really good at? And if I'm in events, what are the things that I'm strong at or strength at? And if they, stayed in events, that's great. Or if I use those same exact skill set to take them a different path, but you really focus on the skills you are, because to be in event planning, you need to be a little of everything. You need to have, you're a therapist sometimes with your clients. So you have to be able to, have that emotional strategy, but you are project management, you are strategizing, you're putting puzzles together, you are a mediator between people, you're a designer. So it's just so many different characteristics that it really pulls from, and really makes you step back and think, wow, there's so many different parts of your persona that you really need to be part of.
Mhm. What particular part of event planning do you like the best?
Um, I like the puzzle of it. I like the when there's a challenge of something that you're like, ooh, this isn't something I've done before, and how do you put this puzzle together, or a space that's really not an event space, that's not really meant for events, but you have to kind of approach it with, how do you take this space that's not meant for events, but put an event in there. I remember working an event in a new corporate business building that was not at all suited for events. It was not meant for events, and you're working with a corporate caterer that does lunches and during the day, but how do you get through the different pieces to put the puzzle together and make something work, and you step back and think, oh wow, we made this work in a really great way.
Yeah, yeah. That's a really fantastic point. There's a law school, Seton Hall Law School, really close to me here in Newark. And they have an event space on their top floor, and it has a really beautiful view, like all the way to the George Washington Bridge. It's really fantastic. But it's strictly for the wedding reception, or any but kind of big party. If you want to also have your ceremony there, you have to do it in the lobby of the building. And in my 20s, when my friends were getting married, a couple of them actually looked at this venue and they were like, I don't want to get married in a lobby. One of them chose it. They loved the view from upstairs so much, they were like, I'm going to chance it. And truly, when you walked into that lobby, you were like, this is a lobby. Like the way that they designed that space, like they just piped and draped it just right, and they put lights in certain places. You walked in and it was just completely transformed. Like I think a lot of brides to be probably walk into there and don't have the vision of what it could be.
You're exactly right. I mean, there's definitely ways to do that and to think about that and have that vision. It's kind of like when you think about, I always think about, compare it to like House Hunter TV show. Someone walks in the show, is like, I can't buy this house because the kitchen's yellow, so it's done. It's over for me. It's like, well, hold on a second. Not only can you change the color, but you can knock down that wall and move that wall and change this and add a room in the back. So it's like you could totally look at something and envision what's possible to take a space and make something that's an ugly duckling, or maybe not a right fit, and make it spectacular.
Right. Yeah, that's absolutely right. And I think that's the most beautiful part of what we do, for sure.
Yeah, no,
It's
it's true.
It's what makes your hair go gray, but it's also the most rewarding in the end, I think. Yeah. What are some of the biggest evolutions that you've seen in the industry throughout your career?
I was thinking about this when I was thinking about this question, and one of the things that became clear, I think, over the last few years, how people have really focused so much about the attendee experience and how not just how to entertain them at an event, but how to make the event in total an experience and allow people the time to experience one another. How do they spend time with one another? How do they have free time? So, for example, in the past, it was about, oh my God, what's the trendiest food and beverage item right now? Back when like, chocolate fountain was a big thing and different colored drape. And it was always about the trendy thing or item to use to entertain the attendees. And it's still important what those items are and what's going what's front and center. But when you think about the whole experience, is like that's just a piece of the pie for the guests. That's just one little element. And that thing is not going to make or break their experience. What's going to make or break are the connections you help them to make, the time you get them to really enjoy the destination. So stepping back, I think people have taken a breath and take time to absorb, like, for the guests to really experience it, you need to think about the whole experience from the second they walk in that door to the second they walk out, the time they have with one another. At the end of the day, that's why we go to events. We go to spend time with one another, just like now you and I are talking, to get to know new people, to exchange ideas. And if you don't allow people the time to do that and have the time just to breathe or grab a coffee in between meetings, that time to really enjoy, it's a mess. And I think people really recognize that and spending allowing that time in their events, their whether they're social, whether business or meetings, for people to connect and make those connections and spend that time.
Yeah, I love it. That's such a beautiful answer. Thank you.
You're welcome. For sure.
What spurred you to jump from the hotel industry into running your own business?
Um, a few things. The way my career involved, I was doing events internally within hotels, and then I moved from there to work in an internal division within Marriott that did corporate meeting events within events that were internal at the from a corporate level. So I kind of had the best of both worlds, where I was running meetings and still in hospitality, which I love, still in the hotel world, which I love. So it was a really nice balance. And then coming out of the pandemic, I was like, if there's an opportunity, I'd always been kind of the back of my mind the last few years before that of, hey, if I was going to do this on my own, what would that look like? And what are the events, the meetings that I really love? And so really it's kind of step back and think of my own person, my own brand, and my own what I really like to do. And I was like, if there's a time to do this and kind of reset from my career and then stop and pause. There are a lot of people saying, "Oh, meetings aren't coming back. This is what's going to happen. Become a realtor. Get out of it. It's over."
I'm a
And at the time,
realtor.
I was gonna. I think I know, seriously, I don't know how many people told me that,
Yeah.
and I'm like, you know what? I kind of just always had in my gut. I was like, things will evolve. People are agile. They're going to change, and they want to be together some way. And so I just had it in my gut that things would slowly evolve. I didn't know how or when, but they would come back. And so I wanted to be ready for that. And so um, the first part of yeah, obviously, until meetings really came back in mid 21, things were quiet, but it definitely gave me an opportunity to reflect, to kind of think about what I wanted to stand more in my business, what my values were, what my brand was. When someone says, "Hey, what's your brand?" That's a hard question to answer. It's really difficult to sit there and say, I'm still kind of figuring that out as you go, think out what your own brand is and how you can differentiate your service from others. But that's kind of the flow from like, um, being internal. And so now, even now, when I'm in a hotel hosting a meeting that happens to be in a hotel, I love that time. I love to kind of reconnect with peers and kind of kind of old stomping grounds, if you will, and knowing that space. But actually, it makes me a stronger planner because I can really understand when you go into a venue or a hotel or a restaurant, the operations of it and how things really evolve. And when you have an ask for a client, you could say, it's a fair ask, or that's not really the way things work. And you know how to kind of bridge the gap between an ask and the way a hotel or restaurant or venue really operate, and how to create that difference and flow. So it's become a strength, I think.
Wow, that's so true. I think so many people don't realize how many different facets there are to an event, like all of the different pieces. I mean, you used the word puzzle earlier, and it truly is a puzzle. It's like a puzzle and a Tetris game because in a puzzle, you have to be really intentional about where you're putting your pieces, but in a Tetris game,
Yeah.
falling, and you're like, I gotta do,
Exactly. I'm just right. Exactly. That's not always a good thing in events. It's just the
yeah,
falling. But you're right, and that's one of the things I love about events. I love all the different facets. Like I can really, fall in with food and beverage and that part, and and then from the creativity and the marketing and those elements, all of them are just different fascinating, but they all are equally important to the totality of the event.
yeah, yeah, it is. Well, as you know, meeting protocol sort of main focus is CMP test prep. And so I would love to shift gears and talk about that for just a little bit. You got your
Sure.
CMP, I think, early on in your career. When was that?
That was likely 2006, I believe it was. And so they require renewal every 5 years. And so I've done the renewal every 5 years and I've kept on it. And yeah, I think it came from that curiosity again, where I think I was working in Atlanta at the time, and I was very active within NACE, and a lot of colleagues that had it. And I was like, "Ooh, what's that? What is that? And what does that mean? And how did you get that?" And so I started going on the road of wanting to know and understand what that meant and why it was important. And so yeah, again, it peaked from that wanting to understand. And they said, well, if you've got it, I want to know. I want to have it too. And I always knew, like, in a city where there's so many different businesses and hotels, how do you differentiate yourself from a competitor? And that's just one more way to have that credential to say, hey, look, I've earned this. I understand what's happening from my experience. So I think it's just one more way to um, give yourself a leg up.
Yeah, yeah, I agree. A little side note, one of the things meeting protocol does, in addition, in addition to alongside the CMP test prep, is we run a once monthly study group, and people always come to the study group with questions about the formulas, and in particular that coffee formula, which now now it seems like those questions are being phased out more and more. Like, very few folks, we bring on like a recent CMP grad every month, and we always ask them, what formulas did you see? And recently people have been saying one formula or none, and we're like, do you know how many of us like lost our hair over that coffee formula?
I
um,
have to tell you, that's an important formula, the coffee formula, because coffee charges get out of hand anywhere, especially now when coffee is ridiculous amount of amounts. You have to be able to know, okay, how many coffee can I quantify it? So that's a really important thing to know.
yeah, there
It's
was a
really funny.
there's a woman on one of the study groups who works for a hotel, and I made a passing comment like, when I do events at hotels, they tell me how much coffee I need, and she was like, I work at a hotel and I don't even calculate that. The computer tells me how much coffee you need. And
Yeah,
so I also
but
wondered who actually does that coffee calculation manually. But it has come in handy in other sort of like in place non-traditional event spaces, like you mentioned earlier, where it's like, oh, I have to bring in my own coffee. So now I do have to figure out how
no,
many.
you do have to figure out exactly.
Yeah. So how has being a CMP helped you, if at all?
It has. It definitely has. I think, first of all, I mentioned earlier, I think it definitely does give you a leg up. I think people see that and they know that there is definitely a level of experience behind it. It doesn't come easily. It's not something that's just given away. You have to work for it. You have to prove yourself for it. You have to, show that you've got a career in the industry, show that you have the experience, that you're active. I think that's one of the really important things about it. As it's helped me to hold myself accountable on those days when you've got a meeting, you're like, oh, I've got a really busy day. I don't feel like going tonight. It's like, you know what? I'm gonna make myself go. And then you get there, like, I'm so glad I came. I saw Dora, I saw this person, I saw that one. I got to spend the time together. And it helps us hold you accountable for yourself, because you need those credits for the continuing education to continue to grow. But then you get there and you learn something new, and it kind of helps to hold yourself accountable. But then also, I think people have come to me and say, "Oh, you got your CMP. How did you do that? And what does that mean to you?" So I think it also um, lets people say, "Okay, Paul's got the CMP. I need to really understand what that means." But so it holds myself accountable, holds other people accountable. And again, I think people see that, and it goes to say, "Okay, this guy's not, he didn't just start party planning the other day. He's got experience behind him and time under his belt."
Right. Yeah. Would you be more, I mean, maybe this is an unfair question, but would you be more likely to hire if you were hiring for your team and you had two generally equal candidates, would you be more likely to hire the one with a CMP designation?
It would definitely grab my eye. It would definitely help me give me some thought, and that would give that person a little more gravitas. I think the fact that they had it, it would definitely want to take a closer look at that person, understand their level of experience and their involvement. I think it's it's one thing to work in the industry, and hold a job, and whether it's in hotels or you're working, for an event planner. But I think to be actively involved and to actively, keep in touch with your colleagues, like, the fact that you're taking the time to talk with me today, I think this is really important to have this dialogue. The fact that you're so actively involved in the Vendry circle and the conversation there, I think that's really important. But just being involved and staying connected with your peers, that's some of the biggest learnings I've seen. And I think if there are people, the CMP helps you to kind of hold yourself accountable, and that tells me a story about that person. Like, hey, if they've got the CMP, it tells me a little bit of background with them right away.
Yeah, yeah, that's a really good point. Well, um, I'm really enjoying talking to you. I feel like I can come up
Yeah,
with 100 more questions.
yeah.
I want to respect your time. And I'm going to go into my closing question, which is, what is the coolest event that you've ever been to, either as an attendee or as the producer?
This is a hard one to answer, so I'm glad I had time to think about it beforehand. Um, I was talking earlier about puzzles, and so one of the biggest puzzles that I was really proud of when we stepped back was this block party that we planned together with some colleagues in San Diego. It was in the Gaslamp district, and it was a whole block and a half. And we had, within this block and a half, there were 6 different restaurants, and there was this one large parking, kind of this very blah looking parking lot. We're talking earlier about interesting spaces, where the band was going to go. And we kind of, when the first time we walked there, like, how are we going to do a block party in this space? How are you going to take 6 different restaurants that are completely different from one another, um, and create a cohesive experience within this block and a half? But after just, collaborating with colleagues on how to use a space, how to plot it out, and the entertainment was Fits in the Tantrums. They were there as our band entertainment. It was super cool, but created an experience that felt welcoming, where guests had this time to be a little more of a progressive experience, where we provided in advance, here are the restaurants you can go to, here are the menus you can experience, here's this entertainment schedule. It fits within the Tantrum plus a few other opening bands, and kind of creating this event and this space and this concept where there really isn't one at all. Well, when you take just kind of if you just walk down the street and think, how do we take this normal just block and a half and make this into a party space and come up with that? And you think about a band and all the things that come into a band's writer, power and backline and space and rehearsals, all of that. And it was just this really great event that when I stepped back and looked at it, I was just like, I couldn't have been happier. I couldn't be excited. Obviously, it wasn't, I didn't do it alone. There were definitely partners involved from decor and DMC and entertainment agencies and people we did together. But it was an accomplishment I was really super proud of, and the event came out killer. It was awesome.
That's amazing. That's so wonderful. I find myself kind of, whenever I'm out and about, if there's like a really cool space or something, like a big empty lot or something, I often think of like, oh, the things that can be done here. And so I'm glad I'm not the only one who thinks of that.
Yes, no, you totally do, and you definitely go to other events and you kind of secretly critique of how you would have done them a little differently, or so. There's always, yeah, we're a competitive bunch. I think we're all a little competitive, but that's healthy. That's good. I think it's good that we are, and we share notes, and again, the dialogue you see together. So
Yeah, yeah, it's friendly competition. So
very, very friendly. I think we're all willing to share ideas, again, as we see the circles of the Vendry, the questions that people ask and the idea sharing that's out there, and people are willing to share information. And that's how we're all going to get better with one another. We're all going to still say you're still always going to be Dora, and what's going to make you special will always never change on how much information we share with each other.
yeah, yeah, that's true. Thanks. That block party that you planned, did that become like an annual thing, or was it just a cool one-off?
The conference itself is a biennial conference, but that particular event on itself was part of that. Was a cool one off, but it's one that we keep on kind of going back to, like, hey, we did this and that in 2018. How do we replicate that feeling, that experience of when you got there, and what that looked like,
Yeah, that's true. Well, thank you so much for being on today. I am so glad that we got to talk. For those who want to learn
Yes, thank you.
more about you and your work, where can they go for more information?
You can visit my website, paultramonteevents.com, and or I'm on LinkedIn, Paul Tramonte. So I'd love to connect with you, and thanks for spending the time to listen to Dora and me. And Dora, thank you again so much for taking the time to talk with me and have me on your podcast.
No, no worries. And I have to say, kudos. Your website is awesome. It is super easy to navigate, and it's beautiful. So great job.
Thank you.
Website.
Appreciate it. Well, it was definitely a labor of love, so I appreciate you saying that.
problem. All right. Well, thank you so much, listeners, and Meeting Protocol fans, for checking out this episode. Don't forget to go to meetingprotocol.org, where you can sign up for our newsletter, which includes links to all of our new monthly podcasts, a CMP tip of the month, and tons of resources for all things related to meeting professionals and your CMP. Thanks.